recording. You can always go back. So you can always go back and go, this is why Tony does not get to talk. Yeah. But I appreciate it, Sean, just that kind of thought and question of how do we reach, especially after, campuses, coming to the end of the season for that. And I think even with Jacob, the scripture he shared on Sunday, there's a time for everything, right? There's a time to plant seed. There's a time to, it says, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to tear down, and a time to build is what Ecclesiastes 3 says.
Might as well restart. Wow.
Yeah, we can restart. Don't worry, we're just
Yeah, we're just getting started.
well, good to have you back. But I think all of us, spiritually recognize there's these times like you all at the campus, you're feeling, hey, we've come to the end of another season, and this is the start of another season, for those that aren't campus. The reality is that we get to, we recognize that with being able to plant out in the gardens. We're like, hey, we're growing seed, we're excited, we're marking off the plots, looking to, we're buying fence and hose and trowels and everything to make this, the start of the season be amazing, with the hope that there's going to be some sort of harvest at the end, right? It was funny that well, funny, I guess necessarily, but one of the ladies was like, helping us through there at the start, and she's helping guide us, and how to do the plots and stuff. And then she was like, well, I'm just not doing it this year because I got one zucchini, I got one tomato, and I got one, and I was like, well, I mean, you're realistic, there wasn't an expectation of a harvest. So she's like, I'm just not doing it, because it's a lot of effort for no harvest, right? And so I appreciate her perspective, and that's why we have a 7-foot fence coming, we're gonna protect the garden, and we're gonna have a harvest, that's the goal. I wanted to cover a couple scriptures first, and I know that, again, we know these scriptures, like this isn't something you haven't been taught. Like I'm going to cover a few scriptures, and then we'll go into some practicals. But I think it's important to always, at the start of the season, to think about these things. 1 Corinthians 3, 5 through 6, we know the scripture here. And you'll get to know my style, or maybe this is the first and only time you'll experience my style.
That's not the case.
My style is a lot of scripture, and I talk a lot, but the majority of what you're going to find from me is a lot of scripture, because I just love being inspired by the scripture. And so in 1 Corinthians 3, 5 and 6, it says, what after all is Apollos, and what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord assigned each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. And so we recognize, that one waters, one sows seed. The reality is, for a lot of different, you're watering on some, you're planting seed on some, and ultimately God is the one that makes it grow, right? And if we don't understand that concept, it doesn't work. Like, I loved it. I bought the seed and I bought the little containers, but my kids have been like planting the seeds, right? And watering them and taking them in and out of the house, making sure they get sun. They had a role, I had a role, and we have a role as we go to plant it in the garden. We're going to continue that. But there's different people working on these different roles so that we hope to have a harvest. Like if we didn't expect a harvest, we would continue to bring them in and out of the house. And luckily right now they're growing. But we also know the concept of just sowing generously. That from 2 Corinthians 9:6. But the thing that I wanted to ask, is, it's another season for the summer, another season as we start the spring, and wondering what's inspiring you to do another season?
Mm.
Like, what gets you motivated to do that? Like, are you going to participate in that? Like, I look back and I go, okay, I've been a disciple for 23 years now. Like, at least that's 23 seasons of, and in campus, it seems like you're like 2 or 3 seasons in a year, so like, this is more than, this is at least my 23rd season of working, and there's a rhythm to life. You figure that out as a married, and you're like, there's a rhythm that goes with life. And so realizing like, okay, what is going to motivate me to get back out there and do this again? Get back out there and like continue to sow seed, continue to water it, and continue to believe that there's going to be a harvest at the end, right? Because we've had harvest times, but there wasn't a harvest, right? That can get discouraging, just like that woman where she's like, I'm not going to plant this year. I'm not going to be part of that, right? But what's going to motivate you again to participate in that? And one of the things that inspired me, and I just want to put it out there, is I was just reading through Ezekiel again, and chapters 1 through 3 just hit me when I was reading that. I was like, good night. Ezekiel gets this amazing inspiration of being able to see God and everything. He's just like blown away that God reveals to Ezekiel, right? And then he gets this call, right? He gets a call to like, hey, I have a job for you. I have something for you to do. Called by God and chosen. And they've given this message. And I love the fact it's like this scroll, and he's told to eat it. And the scroll's like sweet, like honey. He's like, he eats it, and we see that, kind of description a couple times in the scriptures where, in some other descriptions, it's sweet when he's eating it, and then it's sour in his stomach, right? And that's really what we have. We have this amazing message that's incredibly sweet. Like for the disciple, we're like, it's amazing to be a disciple. It's amazing to have what we have. And yet, if we don't understand the sourness with it, if we don't understand the fragrance of death, like we're only grasping part of the message for the people around us. Like this is just, it inspires me when I read Ezekiel, because he's going to a rebellious people, a people that are going to experience judgment and try and get them. And God's like, I'm going to send you to them. The problem, they're not going to turn, but I'm going to make you as hard, like your flint, head as hard as flint, and your jaw, and I get that vision, like, man, that's inspiring to see that God's like, I'm just going to keep sending you, and keep, they're going to keep seeing all these different displays of you laying on your side, and all these crazy ways that God used him to try to display to them like what was going to happen, and it was that story inspires me. But I think for all of us, like what's going to inspire you to do another season, this the spring and summer, or are you going to take this time off? That's a choice we make. You can take it off now. You're supposedly getting paid for this time, like likely God is not that, store owner that just fires us right away, but like the reality is God is expecting, he's paying us, he's given us a wage and wants us to do something with it. He wants there to be a harvest. We have the opportunity. And so I just want to point one is if you're not inspired or motivated, you won't participate. I just want you guys to think about that. Like, what's going to inspire me? Maybe it's God's grace. Maybe it's Jesus' sacrifice. Like, there's so many things that can inspire you. Your love for people. I think of even, when I look around at the people around here, and I'm like, there's so many people that claim to be Christians, and yet, the divorce rate's high. There's such trauma, pain, drug abuse. Like, there's so much of the need that inspires me to want to try to help. And so I think it's important for us to figure out what's going to inspire us to participate in this harvest. Point 2 is to commit to conversations that change lives. I think that's an incredible thing that Jesus did an amazing job of. Like when you think about the woman at the well, like Jesus committed to a conversation. The woman that grabbed his cloak he committed to being like, you know what, I want this out in the open. Let's talk. The demon possessed man, when he ran up to Jesus and Jesus was like out and it didn't happen. And then he commits to having a conversation with it. Like these conversations can happen. And it just amazes me when I just had a coworker a couple weeks back that, if you're just willing to listen, like there is a story there in each person. And I think with that, sometimes we get into that, like, I got to say my piece, or we got to be doing, or we got to do this, and my kids sometimes wonder, they're like, oh crap, dad's talking, but I like to ask questions because I'm interested in people, because everybody has a story, right? And if we allow them to tell their story, and we kind of figure out what is their need, usually the story gets to the point of what the need is there, and allows us to have an opening and be able to share the good news eventually. At least we'll be able to help encourage them, but commit to conversations that change lives. That really is something I see with Jesus that he did. And listening for what it is that what's so important. Because sometimes we think we're like, I'm gonna just shut this down, and it's like, well, if I just had asked, I just listened. I had a coworker that was, she was bummed that she wasn't able to teach the kids class in her church. And so just listening through that, asking her why, why is that so important? I know why that would be important, but I want her to express that and get her fired up and inspired to get back into a relationship with God and doing something with God and for God, right? And so I think it's important as we're reaching out to commit to those conversations. The gospel, obviously we recognize the gospel message is the seed. I don't have to go into that, but we recognize that's the seed that we're trying to plant. And I appreciate Jesus' analogy of that parable when he's talking about the seed was sown everywhere. There was hard ground, there was rock, there was everywhere, and some, came up. And I think it's important that sometimes we're looking for the perfect soil, the perfect point to plant. We're like, where's the farmer's almanac? What day is the perfect day to, and yet if we'd sown generously, something would have come up with something. I think that's important to remember, is that you just keep sowing and keep watering. Kind of the point 3 that I have, let's go to 1 Corinthians 3:8, just a little bit further there. It says, the man who plants and the man who waters have one purpose, and each will be rewarded according to his own labor. We're working together, right? But there's also a reward, that payment for our work, and so I just challenge us to continue to water, continue to work, continue to, go after that, and bonding together while we do that work. It's cool to see. Paul was trying to not make a separation between Apollos and him. He's like, we're just workers. One did this, one did this. We're all just trying to help people, make it at the end. There's not a difference there. I think it's so important. One of the thoughts I had with just watering as a group was just the fact that sometimes, I appreciate, what you shared about Miko, where you're like, that's awesome that, his coworkers want to get together and he's thinking about that, like we can't wait just for you two to like lead something, I think that's the thing, is that, like, yes, you're leading campus, you're helping lead this group, like, but the reality is each of us has to be proactive, and if we're all proactive, then something's happening, because I think so many times I've waited at opportunities where I'm like, well, I'm not in charge of this thing. Like, you didn't give me an authorization over here, like, and yet, no, I'm gonna, and so I had started this men's night thing. I look back with the biggest regret of like, I didn't do it sooner. I should have done it sooner. We got a couple of good ones in, but man, I could have been doing that for more years, and so I think I'm looking and going, what can I start, and what can I put my energy into to, not be like, oh, Sean, you do, like, no, I'm gonna help bring about these experiences so that we can all have an opportunity to be reaching out to people and bringing people to something, you know. And so I think that, you know, looking at that, I could have done that for years had I known about that place, had I been proactive about this, I could have had more of a harvest than I did. When I look at that. I love in Matthew 9, if we go to Matthew 9, 38. Or 35, sorry. Matthew 9:35, it says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And he said to his disciples, harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. And I love that because, I mean, he could see the harvest, like, you know, just praying for a vision of the harvest and also praying for other workers. Like, you know, I've been praying for Mario and Joanna. Is it Joanna? Because
Joanna or Joanna.
yeah, something like that. I'm praying for that. We might get somebody else with
Yeah,
same different name. No, but just praying for these workers to come. Workers to come here, workers to come in Charleston, workers to come in Skagit and Bellingham. Like, these are the places I'm praying for workers to come, because I believe there's a harvest, right? And just praying for that, where it's like, okay, not only am I reaching out, but I'm also praying for workers because I believe there's a harvest here, and I also need the help, right? We all need the help. You know, we look around this group and we're like, this is a city of 50,000 or whatever the population is. We need more people, you know, and so just praying that God will bring about, you know, other workers and a harvest in its time. And so I truly believe, you know, the times that we've been successful is because of prayer, you know, and God, you know, like God brought people we needed. God allowed us to have experiences and, you know, events that worked really well, but it was a lot of praying, you know, praying for a harvest there. Kind of last point before kind of the practicals that I have is point 5 is work with urgency as the fall comes, like work with the end in mind, you know, because I think sometimes we're just like, we're just working. You're like, you know, kind of, you know, like right now, you got to plant at some point. Like these plants are going to go through your roof, or these plants are not going to, like, you got to get them in the ground before a certain time. At some point, it gets too hot. It gets too, like, there is a time, you know, for planting. There's a time for watering. There's a time for harvest, you know. And so in our last group, we really like pushed, you know, at the springtime. We're like, okay, guys, we're looking for a harvest in the fall. You know, like, now it didn't quite happen at the fall. We had 2 baptisms in the winter, but the reality was like, okay, guys, we want to see a harvest. And so we're shooting for the fall. Now, you know, if studies go long and all this, that's fine. You know, that's, you know, but having that vision of like, we're doing this for a harvest. We're not doing this just to do this. Sometimes we as Christians get into the habit of busy work. We're like, well, I'm doing something. I'm meeting with somebody that's been here for 4 years, you know, that's probably not actually interested, you know, like we get into this habit of like, God, I'm doing something, right? I'm meeting someone that that's willing to meet with me, you know, versus actually someone that's open and interested. And so I think it's that, you know, working with an urgency. Like when I was in the homeless shelter, I only had so many families I could be helping, you know, so I was like, okay, every day, every week that this family stays in here and they're not making progress means another family that's still out there homeless, you know. And so I was like, okay, you know, national average 8 weeks. I'm like, if I'm not seeing any growth in these families, I have to make a determination between, are they just poor or are they a sluggard? And so in 8 weeks, I was able to usually be able to tell, are they poor or are they a sluggard? And if they were a slugger, I was like, I got to get you out of the program. And unfortunately, that doesn't, you know, it's not a great thing. I'm going to find you somewhere else. I'm going to give you resources. But I'm like, I got to move you on because there's a goal here. There's more people you know, to help. And so it's not that we couldn't help them on the back burner, but it's like, hey, these are the spots I have. I only have so much energy. And as marrieds and families, realize you only have so much energy, you know, so if you've got one person that's consuming all your energy and you've been doing it for 3 years and this person's just not, like, that person needs to be in the back burner where you're like, I love you, occasionally we'll meet, but you're not my focus. And so working with urgency and looking for that harvest, right? I think of that scripture in Romans 13:12. It says, the night is nearly over, the day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness, like soon, soon this is gonna be over. So like, you work with a sense of urgency, not with a, we're just, you know, and so those are some of the scriptures that inspire me when I was thinking about it. Some practicals that I wanted to get into. You know, I put this out here and it's not a bad thing. Like, you can go for low hanging fruit, you know, like, who is that person that's easier? Like, if you're having a hard time, sometimes we're like, I'm gonna cross the mountains, I'm gonna preach the one on the, you know, it's like, how about like, you know, we're working on our property manager, you know, like he's there, like, you know, I don't have to go to Charleston to preach to him, like, you know, he's, you know, around, like, you know, go for the, I'm not gonna, you know, I say low hanging fruit, but it's the easy one to pick versus like, I'm gonna climb to the top of the tree. Well, there was 10 near the bottom, but I chose the one that was at the top, you know, and so I just think, you know, you only have so much time, like, you know, what's that low hanging fruit that you can be working with? You know, looking for places that have good soil, you know, where am I spending my time? If you're spending your time in places that are not good soil, are not good places to sow the seed, why are you there? Like, you know, at the end of the day, like, go to places, you know, is this a good harvest field? And if it's not, go to the next place. Is this a good harvest field? You know, and it may at some point be a good harvest field, but right now is not the time that it's working out. You know? And so I think that's something that we've learned. You know, I think, you know, having just a vision for, sometimes we have a vision of like, I'm just going to convert couples that look like me, you know, and just recognizing that we have a need for everything, you know, that we have a need for a teen ministry, for campus, for singles, for marrieds, for elders. Like, the reality is, until we have a vision for the whole church, really, it's going to be hard to get the whole church. Like, I think so many times people have been like, well, we'll just get elders one day. You didn't focus on elders. You didn't focus on older marrieds. You didn't focus on teens. Like, you didn't focus on, like, didn't have a vision for everybody, you know, and so you didn't get it, you know. So I think that's important. But I love, you know, trying to get older people. I'm like, I just have a passion for wanting to do that more, you know, because I'm like, you know what? Older people need to be saved too. You know, easier, you know, the younger ones are generally contemplating life. What's life about? Older people are like, was my life worth living? You know, that's just where they're at in that stage of life. Was my life worth living? And some of them come to that conclusion that, man, I really didn't do anything, you know, and then they're bitter and they're sad, and that's an opportunity to reach it too. You know, so, but I think, you know, just being intentional at events, intentional at church, you know, just being aware of what's going on. I think it's important, you know, right now, just recognizing, like, you know, we don't need to be in politics and we don't need to be in a lot of different things, but I think it's important also to understand the times that we're living in, you know, and it can cause anxiety and stress and depression as people are losing jobs, as they're looking, and we're seeing the surveys come back that young people are going, I don't think my life's going to be better than what it, you know, my outlook for the future is not, you know, and that gives us opportunity to get in there and be like, you know, I can't say that it's going to be any better, except for that you have the chance to know Christ, right? You know, and so just speaking to those real pain points in people's lives where they're like, I'm really not sure where everything's going. The only thing I'm sure of is Christ in heaven, right? You know, so helping them to have a point of hope, you know, because they're looking for hope. You know, I see people. Saw a coworker the other day scratching a lottery ticket at work, and I was like, Well, I mean, that's your, like, that's your
Yeah.
hope, like you went on your lunch break to go get a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
I'm not, not banging on you, like you're looking for something, you're obviously, something is top in your life. It gives them an opportunity to have a conversation, right, not banging on, I'm just, it's, you're showing you there's something there, and so I think it's important. I love, Jacob and Rebecca, your story about all your neighbors that you ask stuff for. And that's, I think, a thing that I've learned is that don't be afraid to ask for things. Like,
I go around.
the reality is like, weeks ago, I was like, I sent a message to our property manager and I was like, okay, it's an opportunity for me to make a connection again with him. And I was like, hey, do you know anybody that do you have a second lawnmower or something that I'm looking to buy an old used lawnmower, or do you know somebody that would be selling one, and he didn't at the time. Well, they text back today, Ashley was like, she was like, you know what, you're crazy doing that. Like, that's weird. I get it.
I did, I
I'm
think I
weird.
was, how weird, but go for it.
Yeah, and I'm like, I get it, but it's an opportunity for connection. Right? And so we left the conversation. We left the conversation with him like, okay, it's a done deal. He doesn't have it.
Yeah.
But 2 weeks later, he's messaging, or they're messaging saying, hey, something happened in our family and now we have this lawnmower. And I'm going to be intentional about that, where that's great. I'm possibly going to be able to buy a lawnmower, but also it's an opportunity to get to know them, and reach out to them. So I didn't have to go out cold sharing to catch this person. This was just an ask about, hey, I need a lawnmower, and I can ask all the disciples and y'all would have given me a lawnmower, if you had it, but the reality is I'm asking someone because potentially there's this person that, I could reach out to, and hopefully we'll, and he's got a house that he's working on 2 doors down. I'm like, hey, I go down and work a little bit with him. I'm not going to make anything. I'm just going to go down there to get to know him.
Yeah.
Like, it's an opportunity. He's going to be potentially in my sphere for a while. I could really work on this guy, Is he open? I don't know, but I know that he's open enough to like, be like, hey, I got a lawnmower, hey, there's a start. But I think there's a lot of times as Christians, we can know what it looks like to be busy and not actually be busy working for the Lord. And so I want to just challenge us. There's so many things that we can do, from Pinterest parties to barbecues. You all know the things we should be doing. It's a question of, are you going to be motivated to participate in this season? And it's a season that we can see a harvest at the end if we're intentional about it. Or if we're not intentional about this summer, we'll get to the end of the summer and be like, hey, we were all together, it was good, but we won't have had a harvest and we won't feel fulfilled and we won't feel like we put in a decent work for our wage. So any other things you could think of? Any other great ideas you all have that, in terms of marrieds, the reality is like, we're just trying to entertain our kids, and try to do things. So any sort of activity or finding ways to, connect, y'all do a great job of loving up on our kids, and hopefully we'll do a great job of loving up on y'all. But the reality is there are other people out there that don't have a support network.
Yeah.
They're here alone and they got kids and they're just tired, sometimes we can look at those people at a playground and see that parent scrolling off on their phone, and their kids are being wild out there on the playground, and yet they're just trying to survive. We have a different viewpoint of them, hey, person looks like they need some help, they need some love, and we all do, we all judge, but choosing to not do that and go, there's another person that's just trying to make it, we're all just trying to make it with this thing. So we can provide hope for them and love them, interact with our kids, or, even if you don't have kids, that's great. What can you do to connect with other people and be intentional about it? So hopefully those were some good, hopefully they were practical. I'm not gonna say they're good, but the reality is I wanna make this next season, I wanna see a harvest at the end of it, I was willing to buy a 7-foot fence to see a harvest of vegetables, like, what are you willing to do, to make sure that there's a harvest at the end of this, at the end of the summer, as we go into, wouldn't it be encouraging for the campus to see the Marys having been fruitful during the summer? And they're like, oh, hey, look, I'm inspired by the Marys. Maybe I'll go out there and do some more reaching out. Like the reality is we can inspire the campus to be fruitful when they're seeing us, making fruit. Shouldn't be just us being like, hey, look, campus, you keep doing great things over there, and we're just gonna enjoy your fruit. Like how do we inspire each other through the time? So. That's what I've got. So yeah.
Thank you.
Rebecca goes, it is my midweek now.
Yeah.
No.
I was just curious what your opinion is. So I feel like sometimes I really struggle with like I meet someone and then I'm like, okay, this might be the only opportunity like I'm gonna meet this person because of it. So I kind of struggle between, do I try to just be friends or do I actually try to have like a deep conversation with them? Or like right now, we don't necessarily have anything planned for the next 2 weeks. So if I meet someone tomorrow, it's not like an opportunity to be like, hey, we're gonna go do, there's not that opportunity to invite them to something that maybe they can feel more connected in. So I really struggle with like, do I just jump in and be like, are you interested in like God, or do I actually try to build a relationship with that person? Also, it could be different, like if it's a woman, then normally I want to try to like make a connection, but if it's a guy, I could probably just be like, hey, are you interested in church, or what? I don't know. So yeah, just curious what your thoughts were.
I think it's a great question, and it would depend on like, so for me, for my personality, I like to get into the conversation before I make a decision on where we're going.
Right.
Like, so that's me.
Yeah.
But there are people that need, like, my wife needs a little bit more like,
Mhm.
when she meets someone, she needs to have like the plan in place,
Yeah.
for her to like, so she's different than me. Like a lot of times I get into crazy things going, you know what? I don't know what the outcome is,
Yeah.
like, but she needs to know what the outcome is. The outcome is I only have so much time, so I'm gonna do this and this and this. For me, I'm like, I'm gonna get into the situation and see what comes, I don't know what I'm gonna cover.
Yeah, I was gonna say you're Jacob.
But I also know that I have a purpose too. Like,
Yeah.
I don't do it just intentionally not to have a plan. Like I do it, not knowing what type of hurt and pain, and I would want to help them in whatever we uncover, in my conversation with them. So I think it just really depends on you. Like if you're like, I really need to have a plan for this to go successfully, then have a plan. Like I'm just gonna sow the seed here. Like, or but if you're more like me, then I'm jumping into this and I have no idea where it's gonna go, because it could mean we're studying, or it could mean we're doing a board game tomorrow night, and then so. But that's just how I approach it versus my wife, and knowing that about yourself. Like I appreciate my wife's like, what's the plan? And I'm like, the plan is just to get in there and see what happens,
Yeah.
Panic and stress.
I have a follow-up question to that, to kind of tag with that, because a lot of times I've asked back, I'll be like, wanna have someone over like at 7 o'clock at night? You know what I mean?
I don't.
I'm just like, I'm gonna bring them in, like, let's just do some games or something. So not saying that that's correct, but either you or actually can tag on this, whichever, but like how do you meet in the middle there and like give a little bit from both sides?
It's a great question, because that goes back to working as a team. Like you got to know your battle buddy, and with my wife, I know that I need to for it to go successfully, I have to prime her. Like I know that if we're gonna go to a potential reach out opportunity, she needs coffee. She needs to be primed and ready. Like she needs some rest. She needs to be I know what what it's gonna take for her to be successful. Like, so I know that sometimes we're more spontaneous, but recognizing that our partner, our battle buddy isn't so spontaneous. So like, how do I think ahead a little bit more and help prepare the other person for what works in it. So it's being intentional, really. Like sometimes we really have to do a little bit of planning and be intentional about it versus like, spur of the moment, we're gonna do this. Like, it works for some of us, but it doesn't work. Like I'm like, hey, let's do this. But Ashley needs a little bit of, preparation in her mind, to be prepared for whatever we're gonna do. So that doesn't mean that if we meet someone on the sidewalk that we wouldn't talk to, or something like that. But there's a difference between how we. So just knowing your partner. And then sometimes it's like, okay, maybe she's not the right battle buddy for this particular fight. Like,
I was thinking about that.
Sometimes it's like, okay, she's had a long day and this is a guy that I'm really trying to reach out to. Why don't I get another guy?
Yeah.
And who's that guy that is going to be fine with the spur of the moment calling? Hey, can we do a game night?
You apparently.
That's how we got. But I just think knowing your battle. This person is going to be at the help. I call them right now. He'll be over here to study in a second. There's other people that need a week's notice, and amen to them. Like I get it. That's just their style. But knowing that about each person. So my wife's amazing. I just gotta be intentional about kind of priming her with coffee, and she's amazing when she gets going. She just needs to get going. Yeah.
And in fact, actually, I think involved in how it's incredible because you would know, like, there's, it's different groups that you're a part of, have different gift sets, and there were certain times, like for our Pinterest parties and things, we had a lot of kind of our reserved people at the time. And she's like, hey, Ashley, we need you to this is your moment. Not that I was the only one, but they needed that person that was like, for that type of event.
So they chug you full of
Yes.
coffee. Right there.
But eventually.
And then, you get tired throughout the week and everything. But I think that's a good point about your battle buddy or whatever. Like, I love having people in my home. I love doing all those things. Sometimes I'm spontaneous. Do you think I would actually be more spontaneous than you? But I'm really not. So for him to be like, hey, I have somebody coming over in a half an hour, that's a lot to me because I not that I think, I don't care when I go to somebody else's, I'm saying that. But for me, I'm like, I don't always keep a 100% clean house. And so I'm like, I want them to feel welcome and feel loved. I want it at least sanitary and clean, that there's not socks sitting all over the, ground.
Trying to make eye contact.
Yeah.
You threw your voice back.
I
noticed.
So that, so I'm not then prepared to make them over. I think something that is helpful is for us even being here of like, Tony's like, hey, we want to have people in our house. How about you can set it up, but how about this night? And so I am the planner more so of the two of us. And so I have done a lot of that of, do we get meet this week or next week or, and so I think that that's helpful because I can be prepared. That's something that's helpful, but then he also is having that spontaneity, even though it's not. But I think even somebody when it's more spontaneous, like what you were talking about, Rebecca, I think it kind of goes away from maybe what we were just talking about. But I think if we don't have something worse, because I felt that way before, what am I supposed to invite them? Sometimes when I'm in that moment, I'm like, I'm gonna invite them over, but then right away, I'm gonna invite somebody else with us to become the thing. I'm like, hey, I was thinking about getting some people together and having, movie night or whatever.
Yeah.
You can still create that, but I think either it goes back to maybe having that day in your schedule that you usually keep open for having people in your home or, bringing them in or you going to them.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of helps both sides of having that maybe one night that's like your night that you know is free, that he can be like, hey, I already know that it's free, yes, let's go.
Then
But you've already have it like, okay, that was in our schedule,
I wait day up.
yeah.
I feel like
Let's do this.
Not that it always works.
I feel like the thing that's natural for me is probably to be like if it's another person who I know is married, be like, hey, like my husband and I would love to hang out with you, speak for him, but or if it's a like woman, yeah, I feel like I like the partner idea of like trying to be like, hey, you know, like me and some other girls like to get together and have brunch. As of
then you
this
invite-
Saturday.
I'm like, you're not lying, you're like, I was thinking about.
Yeah.
I like lunch too.
Yeah. And this guy, Cody Hodgson, like brunch, we like to have brunch all the time.
Cody likes.
Like everyone. It's like, I love getting together.
And that's the fastest way to kill something is if you don't have battle buddies, you can call on to bring them in to help, if you're not able to like. I have no idea what they're gonna like, so when I'm talking with them and all of a sudden something comes up, it's like, oh, well, you like to do that, okay. Let's do that, and I'll bring someone along, so I think, what Paul says, it's all things to all men, you're like, oh, okay, now we're doing that, one guy we were, we study with, was into horses. I don't prefer horses, like, I have bucked enough hay now and had enough horses and put fencing in for this guy, and I love him as a brother and he's a brother and appreciate him so much, but I'm like, do I love horses? No, but I did for that guy. And Ashley was great because it was like, babe, he asked me to go buck hay. I was so love to do that, but had she not been supportive, I wouldn't have been able to go,
Or
buck
if
hay.
I'm like you, actually. I'm like, I need plans. And I think,
Noticing a trend.
yeah. Ladies, I feel like I need a plan. And I think I need I need boundaries and limits too. So I think I'm finally getting used to reaching out to campus because I've seen people do it. I've seen it work. I've seen it's okay. Like no one's gonna hurt me. Like I see it, so it works. But I think I get I don't know what the limits are to other places. I hear you're saying you doing building relationships with people as a way and kind of easing your way in that way. Has there been other ways that you guys can think of that have been you might have been scared of it first, this seems awkward and not right, but then it ended up being okay. Obviously there's the grocery store one, but I heard you even say you were walking down, if you were walking to the street or anything, or how those even go about.
We've been more successful with people that, people that knew people, finding that person of peace that opens the door for communities. I'm not saying it can't be done.
Yeah.
Cold sharing works, but there's a very percentage, it's, I don't know what the actual percentage is, if it's 5% or, whatever. It works, there are people that make it cold contact sharing, but the reality is that I think sometimes, we forget about, hey, this person, sometimes it's just getting disciples to be like, hey, who in your family might be open? And they're like, oh, maybe this person. Well, then get me in contact with your family member, because it's awkward for them. They're not having that conversation, but it's get me in contact with them. I'm more than happy to set up a family barbecue, so I think it's just helping, a lot of times it's helping disciples have a vision for the people they're around, because sometimes we're we get focused, we're like, oh, I reached out to them at one point.
Yeah.
Like, when they weren't open, you know, but now they might be open,
Yeah.
so it's been interesting to see, you know, like, there's someone that their family member's dying, and like, it's a horrible situation, but the family actually might now be open, like, you know, using any and not every opportunity to impact people.
Yeah.
So it's like, who do you know and who might be open? And if you reach out to them and they're like, I'm not interested, you're like, you know, anything else? Like, so, like, that's not a bad question to ask. I heard that one time. I was like, that's a great question. If it's not you, who else would, you know, be interested? They may not, they may know somebody that's going through some challenging time. It's questioning things or not happy with their church or whatever. So.
Well, and if you're already posting something that you know a few extra people can go to, you know, the person you're inviting, you can offer for them to invite a few people. Because that gets more people there, then you have more opportunities to meet, but also might make them feel a little more
Comfortable coming, yeah.
Yeah, you know, I'm sorry, I was thinking back to when you guys showed up at the Pentecostal. thing, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, they were, wait, what were they? They were apostolic.
Oh.
Yeah.
But another thing it has to do with- I think it goes back to that intentionality as well. There are gonna be people, like you said, out in the street and cold sharing. That's not necessarily my gift set, although I try to do that whenever possible. But I think something being intentional, even with what I do with my time, what events I do or what things we do. I remember back in Skagit, they would have, it was pre-COVID, but like craft days in that late afternoon for, you know, whomever, but usually women. And so a few of us disciples would go to those because you have to sit down at the table. You're conversing with people. There's new people every time. And we made a lot of contacts through that. Or just people we, you know, met and were able to converse more with them, ask for if they go to church, all that kind of stuff. And then also I think of like things like the Pinterest parties or events like that. That was a lot of that, inviting people, but then people could invite people. And even though we had some of the same people coming for the whole time, there was numerous people they brought out that we were able to sometimes study the Bible with, some became disciples even from them. So even though they never maybe had interest in that, but then they even came full circle right before we left. I remember one of the ladies that have been around forever, and she was like, I just feel like I don't have a lot of like people that can a lot of like, parenting advice for stuff. I could have laughed. It's like, I see what's going on. You're gonna ask me, but we always don't have to, even though you know, everyone. But she's like, I see your children, and I see how you're trying to raise them in God, and how do you do that? You know, and yeah, but it took those years of, you know, not that I say she wasn't one that I focused on forever though, but she did get to see our lives, you know. I think just again, being able to bring people in, but then having them invite people, but then again, I think that intentionality when if I'm an event, is I'm trying to be intentional of standing in the room and seeing, I'm not gonna just talk with disciples, like, you know, I'm gonna, oh, I see that person sitting alone over there. I'm gonna talk to them because that's probably really uncomfortable to be in a room that you don't know anybody. But I definitely notice, I think that's sometimes what I see, we can forget that and we can just be comfortable, it's familiar, we're having fun, especially just a fun event, we're just disciples, which is awesome. But then really trying to include those people around. Sometimes I have to be intentional about that.
When I think of even, you know, when you think about campus, you probably need to touch them at least twice a week, you know, like at least twice a week for them to feel like there's any connection, you know, like when you get to married's level,
You don't
you're
have
like,
life.
once every,
Once every year and you're good.
like the reality is, you know, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks is fine, you know, when
Yeah.
it's married, you know, because that's, you're in a, like, everything's not crisis every day, you know, but you didn't see them every other day or every like 3 or 4 days. They're like, you're not my friend anymore. You're like, you literally like, you know, you're live in hour by hour, I just think of, I think that's just a good thing to think about when you're reaching out to different age groups. You're like, okay, this person, married. Okay, as long as it's once every 2 to 3 weeks, they'll be fine,
Yeah.
but it's a little more, kids are more, so. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
I think I'm good.
He's
Well, yeah.
Maybe Bill.
Yeah.
I think we'll be back next week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Shameless.